Gary, I'm going to start with you, actually. I'm going to start with an audience question, which feels like just a mini handbrake, maybe, on some of the things you put forward. But it's a fair question. How credible are the surveys that you've introduced us to of Gen Z at this stage, noting that a significant percentage of them are not have yet to reach an age of perceived maturity, and how much allowance do you make for a change in their preference? There must be some sort of law about the diminishing lifespan of each new development.
It's a great question. The answer depends on how credible you guys find McKinsey and PwC. Those are two organizations, and by the way, that's not a leading question. Some of you guys might think those two organizations are not credible at all. I wouldn't blame you at times. Those two organizations have been tracking generational consumption behavior because it's their business too. They have plenty of research that has proven to be true about millennials over the course of the last 2 decades. They started longitudinal studies about Gen Z many years ago, and the majority, not all, but the majority of those metrics are coming from the surveys and the research that those two organizations have published. But it is still to be seen whether or not those numbers are going to play out in real behavior. I can tell you from my experience as an internet consumption or consumer product guy, that's my entire career. That's what I've been building over the course of at least the last 12 years in multiple different media sectors, that those numbers, they bear out in my experience with Gen Z and their behavior online.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And another point I wanted to ask you really is, given, and I'm going to use all the wrong terminology here, but given all that virtual world that we seem to be looking at, do Gen Z have to come to the races? Do they need to do that?
They don't.
They do it all through instead of a sandbox, they've got the paddock or whatever?
Yeah, they don't. And that might be part of the problem here, is that they see very, very little reason to come to the races. Maybe you guys give them a reason, but at the very least, it's really important for there to be a funnel where they get to participate in racing without actually having to be in the paddock. If you don't start there, if you don't start from the extra paddock activity, then I think it'll be very tough to bring Gen Z behavior into the racing world as it is today.
So what do you think, Andrew, we're to make of the real-life experience then as we move forward? Where does it fit in, Andrew?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
What do I make of the real-life experience? Well, I think, we do a lot of things really well. I think, and there are also a lot of opportunities for improvement. I mean, Jamie's presentation showcased some terrific event day and lead-up experiences that are happening in New South Wales. VRC's here today. They do a terrific job at Flemington during the carnival. But we also make it hard in a lot of ways. Like, I think Gary looks very, very cool today. I'm a little bit in love with him intellectually, but also the way he looks. He looks fantastic.
No, I invest in cryptocurrency, so I can't afford a suit.
You can't go into the better areas of racecourse wearing that in most parts of Australia. You go, why? Well, who cares what Gary's wearing? It doesn't make any difference to me that he's wearing a hoodie and I'm wearing a suit. I'd rather be wearing jeans and a blazer. But that's one way we make it hard for people. And so, because some people like the formality of racing, they're into it. They say the traditions of racing are important, so that's great. But don't make everybody else like what you like. Let them like what they like, and then give them more of it. And then you can segment the parts of your racecourse or segment the parts of your offer to cater for it.
I mean, you gave us a whole list of areas to change, basically. And have outsiders as well as insiders. But implementing that is not straightforward, is it? It's not a quick fix program. How do you do that?
Oh, look, it can be quick if you absorb the key principle, which is different people want different things, and we all always have to overcome the insider problem. So my background was in professional cricket, not playing. I'm a very bad cricketer. But the business of cricket, and I was lucky to be in the middle of probably the two big strategic revolutions in cricket in the last 20 years, one of which was the T20 revolution, and then the second of which was the women's revolution, which then became the second part of the T20 revolution. I presented to the Cricket Australia board in 2004, and the topic was, how do you grow Australian cricket? And they said, look, stop me if this sounds familiar. You've got two one very traditional product. It's 150 years old, called Test cricket. It's complicated, it's long, goes forever. You all love it. We love it. And you've got one-day cricket, which is the new thing, but it's still a little bit long. It goes for 7 hours. We think it's short, but it goes for 7 hours, seriously. And people who don't like cricket, which is about 50% of people, think cricket is too long and too boring, and they don't understand it. Luckily, the good people of England have invented this new format called T20. It goes for 3 hours. It's a party. It's really simple. They wear colourful clothing. There's fireworks. There's music. There's speed dating. It's a lot of fun. You should start a T20 comp. And they said, yeah, that sounds good on paper, but it's not real cricket. And that was the insider problem. Anyway, fast forward, we started the Big Bash, then morphed into the Big Bash League in cartoon colours to attract kids, females and families. So not white men in white clothes, but people that look like Nickelodeon, kids, females, families. And then that's grown the audience for Test cricket. And then we thought, well, that's really good, but it's all blokes, and and our fan base, not surprisingly, skews blokes. How do we get more women watching? Why don't we put some women on screen playing professional cricket? Oh, people don't want to watch women playing cricket. Really? We looked at who watched the Australian women's cricket team play cricket, and it was basically blokes over 40, which is the people who like watching cricket. So we said, look, people like the sport. If we put the sport, the format, and the team and the time slot on, we'll do very well. So we basically doubled our commercial inventory overnight by creating Women's Big Bash League, which everyone thought was fantastic. AFL followed with AFLW and so on and so forth. And now the Indians have finally created, after a long delay, have created the Women's Indian Premier League, and they just sold 5 teams for $572 million US. And those teams cost more than the original men's teams in 2008. So they've created $1 billion league overnight.
And that's work. But would you accept, maybe it's a message or not for racing, that if you make as dramatic, innovative changes as that, there is collateral damage, probably. And you mentioned, Test cricket. Okay, it may be thriving in one or two areas. It's certainly dying in many others. So it's never going to sort of hold the way it did.
No, it's actually exactly the opposite. That was the fear of Cricket Australia, is that T20 is going to kill Test cricket. I said, do you think bringing more viewers into cricket is going to kill cricket? I reckon bringing more viewers in is likely to grow cricket, and that's what's happened in Australia. That the attendance and the ratings for Test cricket have never been higher because people have sampled the entry-level product. They've said, that's really good, I like that. What else have you got? And they say, well, there's this really complicated thing called Test cricket, and then they get hooked into that. And then we've invented a hybrid format in Australia. I'm looking at my Indian friends. We've got Test cricket that goes for 2.5 days, where we get bowled out by you blokes cheaply. So that's a new format we're working on because we can't play spin.
So Test cricket is adapted to survive in a sense.
Yeah, and you're I mean, you guys are getting 500 in a day. It's amazing. And the Ashes this year will be the top rating. That'll rate it like crazy. It'll be on 8 o'clock every night in Australia. It'll rate 1 million viewers a night. It'll be the highest rating sport of the year.
Could I turn to you, Jamie, for a moment about attracting new audiences? You've done that like nobody else. I mean, they've come in their droves. Holding on to them all year round. I mean, that's one of the great challenges, isn't it, for any annual event? How do you keep your fan and keep your audience engaged? It's an age-old problem in sport. I think the Olympics is a classic example. Turn up once every 4 years, you expect to last until the next 4 years. So how do you do that? And what sort of things are you implementing to do that?
Yeah, I'm encouraged by Gary's presentation because it has lots of challenges in it, and we thought we were travelling pretty well with our engagement of Gen Z. And listening to the presentation today, we realise now that we've got so far to go. The opportunity is quite significant for the racing industry and the race clubs that operate in this business. I've got a couple of Gen Zs at home, and for me, it's been so valuable to be able to sit down with these guys and their peer group, because that's what we do. They do go to the races. They love going to the races. It's not because of the role that I have. They leave school as an 18-year-old, and you touched on this, Andrew. We need to get them as an 18-year-old, and we need to get them to the race course. They do enjoy dressing up, though. I don't know if it's the private school education but they enjoy dressing up. and they go with their partners, and so they're big groups of people. So these social experience seekers are there for more than just the race day experience. And we've focused heavily on food, on fashion, experience throughout the day. Music is a big component of that as well. And these young children, young men, young people, we've engaged 62% of them now at the Everest. And now keeping them is the challenge for all of us, because we need to be regularly communicating with them with content that they actually want to receive. It's really important that I think that Tim suggested here, that we've got to understand what makes them tick, what makes them want to go to the race, and what is going to make them come back. And of course, not many of us are asking them, what motivates you to come to the racetrack? And I think it's the next stage. We do a lot of research, and we think we know what they want from the racetrack, but I think we haven't touched the surface on this at this point.
Tim, it's a good point about, you talk a lot about motive, what's the motive for it, but to find the motive, that's driven by data to a large extent. I mean, how much better would it be to have all the wagering data in the mix as well? And how would that change, perhaps, the sort of product that you provide?
Forgive me, everybody in this room, but the wagering data and the way that wagering influences this industry has made the sport behave not like a sport. It doesn't behave like other sports. I'll give you a couple of examples. I said in my presentation, 20 million search queries per month around data. Around betting, effectively betting. Racing Media is brilliantly optimized to answer those questions. And it does that because its biggest clients and the revenues are betting. But as a result of that, everything is very predictive. And it's data-centric, and it appeals predominantly to men, which means that the stories around the sporting side are just not being told in the way that they are in other sports. Now, my job, our job in World Horse Racing, is to make heroes out of these stars. So we don't talk about wagering or betting at all. We're not anti-betting in any way. Of course we're not, with our stakeholders. But we decided that we would be a non-betting and wagering platform. We don't talk about the odds. We don't talk about who's potentially going to win. But we make heroes out of the stars of the sport. When I say the stars of the sport, that is everybody, from the stable hands, the grooms, to the trainers, and the jockeys. I mean, the jockeys are almost unknown. Beyond the top stars are almost unknown in this sport. I was absolutely shocked when we first started researching World Horse Racing for launch back in 2018. I was shocked to find that racing in the UK is the second most attended sport after football, but only 27% of people who went racing could actually name a horse that was running that day. So that means they're not really going to watch the sporting stars. So our job as an industry, if we want to engage a new generation of horse racing fans, is to make them feel some empathy towards the stories. And the stories out there are just fantastic. If you go onto the platform, go and have a look at our YouTube channels, stories about retired race horses, horse welfare, your horse yoga, and then some of the stories around owners and trainers and how they've become, their horses have become champions, are really moving. And we need to tell these stories, and we need to tell them in a really rich way.
Isn't that what a lot of racing is doing? I mean, how many stories can you tell for a start? How many heroes can you have? We all pick up on, in the end, the big stories, don't we? Obviously, Lionel Messi has far more followers than the left back at Brighton at the moment. So I just wonder what the true sort of potential is for that.
I think the potential's huge, because actually, as I showed from the Blue Point video, it was. This is not an expensive video to make. I mean, probably filmed with an iPhone. We turned the camera around and filmed the groom, and the emotion from the groom and the way he reacted was just fantastic and resonated brilliantly across the world. And it resonated because people had empathy. So there are countless stories, and they shouldn't just be about the top stars. It's the story from the stable to the champion, and you know, telling that in a rich way. We can all do that and elevate the sport.
And do you think, Gary, I mean, you obviously you're focusing very much on what Gen Z wants and is interested in. We're still left with, I mean, you know, TikTok and Instagram and embarrassing things like that to have to talk to you about. They're still valuable platforms, surely.
They absolutely are. So don't throw those platforms away. I mean, you could see from Tim's presentation, from what Jamie said about and how they built the audience in Everest, that those existing platforms do still project. And they're very, very loud broadcast mechanisms. Next generation do behave the way that we expect on those platforms. But those are no longer the only platforms. And there are so many other ways in which Gen Z engage with one another and communicate with one another that are hiding just underneath the surface. And because we are now, this gap is so big, right? We are now one full generation separate from what they're actually, from you know, that next generation of consumer. We just don't know about a lot of the ancillary behaviors that are actually going to become primary behaviors relatively soon.
So all these, all the racing areas, the different, what's the word I'm looking for? Whether it's Racing Victoria or New South Wales, should they all have a Gary Liu in their midst? Or in fact, let's be honest, a Gen Z consultant?
That's the perfect way to put it, David. I think that having me is pretty useless. I'm not that generation. But that next generation knows exactly what they want. And I mean, talking about motivations, that's the key thing, is that we oftentimes look at behaviors and we just want to replicate behaviors that are successful from one place to another. Okay, it's kind of force behaviors from one place to another without understanding the motivation. That's what happens in a monopolistic environment. And I come from news, right? So I know it really, really well. What we did for the first 15 years of the internet and our industry was when one news organization somewhere in the world did something, or another media company of some kind, did something that attracted even a small pocket of internet users, at that point millennials, which is who we cared about, we would replicate it from one country to another, from one news organization to another, and it would fail over and over and over again. Because we did not care about the user. We didn't ask why the user was behaving the way that they were behaving in England, thinking that they would do the exact same thing in frickin' Alabama, right? It doesn't work that way. And I think that we're kind of starting to see that repetition again with programs, programming, content, and as well as technologies that are being built for Gen Z. When you take Web 2 technology today, and you're building apps for Gen Z, all the like social networks, and say, hey, this is going to be, you know, the Facebook for the next generation, you're going to get it wrong, because what they expect from community is so vastly different than what Facebook and Twitter offer to them. Even if you create something that has the right colors, right, or uses the right font, right, that doesn't get to them right, because we misunderstand the motivation.
I think that's right. So I would absolutely second that. And I'd say from a media point of view, and actually from a marketing or all of our organizations' point of view, the most valuable assets are now young people that are, in all manner of respects, the digital natives. You will note that there's an expression in digital media where you're either creating content or a service, or particularly in building applications or websites, that you shouldn't let the hippo have the loudest voice. And the hippo is the highest paid person in the room's opinion, because the highest paid person in the room is probably the oldest guy with the most experience, and that person's experience is irrelevant today in the context of what Gary has said.
Yeah, average revenues for Gen Z rather suggest the hippo might be the youngster as well. Andrew, you wanted to add something as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of my takeaways from this whole discussion is, you know, horse racing is a TV show that people punt on, right? And all drama including sport, but including movies, books, plays, everything that's been, all form of entertainment for 2,000 years has basically had one simple format, which is a goodie, a baddie, for high stakes, death or glory, and an uncertain outcome. And that's why we turn up to movies. That's why we turn up to sporting events. That's why why we punt. It's actually the losing that makes punting important. If you won, it would just be called putting money in the bank at 2 or 3%. Boring, profitable but boring. So it's that basic story structure that matters in every sport, including racing. And then we're a media business. And so the stories we have to tell behind that are who's the goodie, why are they the goodie, who's the baddie, why are they the baddie, and what stakes are they playing for. So we're doing a documentary on the All-Star Mile at the moment, and which is a format we stole from Japan. Thank you. And I was asked to describe it. I said, look, this is a $5 million bank heist. There's $5 million available on March the 18th at Moonee Valley, and there are 15 gangs plotting to get it. But only one gang can get it. There's an owner, a trainer, a jockey, an owner, ambassador, and they're all plotting. They're all plotting how am I going to get in there, get the gold, and get out before the cops come. And one of them's going to be successful, and the other 14 aren't. And that's every bank movie ever made. That's our sport. But we don't describe it that way. So we have the issue that Tim described where people rock up to the racecourse and go, what is this race? Who are these horses? Who are these people sitting on top of them? Why is that person in the mounting yard so excited? Oh, he's the groom. Oh, right. What's a groom? So we don't tell those stories really well. So I think takeaway is the dramatic structure is there in racing. The stories are there to tell. And we've got to do that better with our race formats, but also our media production and content production, both the stories we tell and the channels through which we tell them.
Recreate the storytelling and find new ways of doing it. I'm just going to close on a reference to a quote you had of Jeff Bezos earlier as well about be terrified of the customer and the potential customer. I think a lot of what we have heard in the course of this afternoon is slightly terrifying. And that's largely your fault, Gary.
I apologize.
But I suppose the message is embrace the terror if you want to thrive and survive in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you all to put your hands together for a fabulous panel? Thank you very much indeed.